A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're watching from. You're most welcome to Smart 24 TV, where we drive your business. My name is Anthony Sebale, and I am your host. We have very special programming today on the South-South Cooperation Day, and that is 12th of September. Just after the G20 summit and BRICS, and now follows the South-South Cooperation under the United Nations. According to the United Nations, South-South Cooperation is a technical cooperation amongst countries of the global South. That is, generally speaking, countries below the equator, if you could say so, but still countries that are developing, cooperating together and collaborating for a common cause. It is a tool used by these states and the international organizations, civil society, and private sector actors in order to collaborate, share knowledge and skills, and successful initiatives in specific areas such as education, health, climate change, and the like. Now, today joining me on the line to discuss this and more, first of all, to discuss what the South-South Cooperation is, what it has achieved, and the challenges therein within the South-South Cooperation. Joining us are very special guests. We have Mr. Pranjal Sharma, who is online as well, going to be joining us. He is an economic analyst, advisor, and an author who focuses on technology, globalization, and global inclusive growth. He is an author of his new book called The Next New, which is going to be definitely premiered on this show, and we have the privilege to be able to listen from him on what is entailed in this new piece of work. We'll also be having Mr. Abhilash Puljal, who is a social scientist, a trade strategy and private sector development specialist with 2 decades experience in a very strong advising public and private sector, multilaterals and the like. Mr. Puljal will be joining us live from New Delhi, and we'll be discussing more of the South-South Cooperation, on what it is, especially from now the Indian perspective. He's been through different continents, Asia, Europe and Africa, and a couple of others, with different strategies and different commitments within the South-South Cooperation. Also joining us from South Africa will be none other than Dr. Shingai. And Dr. Shingai is experienced as well in research and policy analysis and monitoring and evaluation. He is a lecturer at the University of Rhodes. He has also lectured at the University of Cape Town and has over 15 years of experience in the academic sphere and consulting arena. And then finally, joining me still here in studio in Kampala is none other than Mr. Andrew Otieno. Mr. Andrew Otieno is an economist who specializes in regional and regional integration and, of course, collaboration within different regions as well on the African continent. To be specific, the East African Community and the African Free Continental Trade Area. You're most welcome, gentlemen, to the program.
Thank you.
I'll start with, first of all, Dr. Shingai. Dr. Shingai, thank you so much for joining us. It is my honor to introduce and, of course, simplify this term in terms of what the South-South Cooperation is. Of course, we generally define it as the collaboration between countries in the South or the global South. But in the simplest terms, what could you define the South-South Cooperation? Dr. Shingai.
No, thank you so much, Anthony, and welcome to our viewers. Well, simply put, Anthony, South-South Cooperation, as you said, simply refers to that situation where countries, specifically within the Southern Hemisphere, or what we'd call your lesser or developing countries, band together to cooperate or to work together on a number of different issues. They could be political, they could be economic, they could be social. And usually in this context, we are talking of countries that have more or less similar histories, similar, having come from colonial backgrounds, having also gone through similar processes of development and faced a number of challenges as such. So broadly speaking, that's what we refer to when we talk about South-South cooperation.
Well, Dr. Shingai, when you talk about the countries in the global South, does that necessarily mean, like I said, countries below the equator line, or there could be countries in the North that fall under the South-South cooperation?
Yes, the term South-South, when you think of it literally, it may come across as a bit of a misnomer. You do, of course, have some countries within the Southern Hemisphere, such as Australia and whatnot, which are considered as being, economically part of the global North, but geographically located in the global South. You have other countries which are, north of the equator, but which would be considered geographically as part of the North, but economically and given their social history are part and parcel of the South. So there is a bit of a disjuncture there. But to speak to your point, when we speak of South-South cooperation, we're talking about countries that, as I said earlier, have similar histories, have also more or less fall within the same economic and development parameters. So countries, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, we can talk of countries in the Caribbean, Latin America, much of Southeast Asia, India, and of course, what we would also refer to as our emerging economies, those which we have seen as part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and of course, South Africa.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shingai Motizwa, there in South Africa. And now I'd like to turn to Mr. Thieno Andrew on this next one. Well, when you look at our village setting, shouldn't the richer villages really be helping out the smaller and poorer villages rather than, or in the other hand, countries that are richer be reaching out with aid and any other sort of support to the poorer countries? Why do we, in this case, Mr. Thieno, need instead collaboration amongst the countries of the South rather than aid directly given from the North?
Reliance on richer economies and the villages, as you've put it, definitely will not get us the long-term development, sustainable development, I should say, that we intend to achieve. Reliance on the rich countries, or for poorer villages to be relying on richer villages, would be nothing more than what I would call a handshake with handcuffs, as some authors have stated. They might be offering you assistance, but it comes with a lot of conditionalities, etc. In essence, as has been said in certain places, you teach them, you don't give a man a fish, you teach a man how to fish. Therefore, there's a lot that we ourselves can do amongst ourselves, within our governments, within our local governments, etc., etc. Reliance on the richer countries for us to be able to gain the development that we need, that is a thing of the past. Time for us to move to the next stage and actually have the villages working, not just amongst themselves, but with the villages in countries such as those in the global South, to collaborate amongst each other to achieve long-term goals.
Mr. Thieno, you are a frontliner when it comes to African integration, regional integration within Africa. And the collaboration of the South, when you talk about the South-South cooperation, that's exactly the agenda. That cooperation between these countries to ensure that they have a common goal and achieve it together. But then let's talk about the bigger picture. Have we, as Africa, as generally the global South, been able to reach a certain level of collaboration in as far as especially the South-South cooperation is concerned? Have we reached a certain level of fruition in the efforts to integrate and collaborate?
It's a great pleasure for me to inform you as an economist that we definitely have. Not just from a regional perspective, but I can speak also from a continental perspective. Many in the audience definitely have heard, without any doubt whatsoever, about the East African community. This is a combination of various African nations. Without me getting into those details, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, etc. The most recent member joining is the DRC, and I think South Sudan is coming on board very soon, if they haven't already. So we've definitely gained a lot of, we've established a lot of ground regarding collaboration, not just within the region itself. You've heard of the Economic Community of West African States, you've heard of the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. So from a regional perspective, we're definitely gaining ground, and we've made a lot of progress. Even more progress that we have achieved is from a continental perspective regarding the African Continental Free Trade Area. If my information is correct, I think we have 54 signatories, and there's only one country left. Not sure which one it is exactly, but there's a lot of collaboration at the continental level also. Therefore, from a regional perspective, lots of ground we're gaining. Here in East Africa, we're trying to establish a monetary union also. There have been a few challenges here and there. So from a regional perspective, a lot of progress has been achieved. From a continental perspective, the African Continental Free Trade Area is heralding that cooperation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thieno, for that very passionate answer. I would like now to turn to Mr. Abilash. Mr. Abilash Pujal serves as the principal lead for the International Developmental Consultancy, that is Abilash Pujal and Company. Now, adding to the points raised by Mr. Thieno Andrew, I can see that there must be commonalities in the developmental context of India and many African countries. However, there are many key differences in terms of culture, economic standing, and governmental frameworks between the countries in the South-South cooperation. What would you say has to happen in order to be able to look at the South-South cooperation in terms of what is challenging? We've seen, like Mr. Thieno has said, efforts have been put, but the integration, the collaboration seems to be coming in very slowly, especially looking at, just giving an example of the African countries. You're looking at COMESA, you're looking at East African Community, and now the African Continental Free Trade Area. All that is in effort to integrate, but it is slowly coming. What could be the challenges therein, and what do you think are some of the solutions to these challenges that the South-South cooperation is facing?
The way I look at it is, while there are challenges, there are also opportunities. Why do I say that? The way I'm looking at it is that there are three-pronged challenges that we are looking at when we work between countries in the global South. The first one is basically a challenge that comes from a political structure that the countries are. You know, there are some countries which are democratic in their structures. The others are autocratic in their structures, but you still have to work with each other, because at the end of the day, South-South cooperation is for people-to-people relationship and for the people to grow. So for that to happen, you have to overcome these political structures that are there, and to be able to bring in that collaboration from various aspects, like Shingai had mentioned before, be it from a technology transfer, be it from capacity building, or even for that matter to bring in investments. So political structures is something that one needs to go over for us to be able to be successful and making those challenges into opportunities. The second challenge, the way I look at it, is the economic disparity that is there between these South-South countries. Countries like China and India are, over trillion-dollar economies, multiple trillion-dollar economies, whereas if you look at countries, some countries in the global south are very, very poor, need a lot of hand-holding, need a lot of inputs, need a lot of technology transfer, and what else. So this disparity also needs to be overcome. This disparity also needs to be looked at, and I think this is one of the things that where the better growing or the faster growing economies of the global south will be able to support the lesser growing economies for their growth. And the third important challenge is cultural differences. The cultural differences being, some of them are Anglophone, some of them are Lusophone, some of them are Francophone. The legal systems are different. The people they have, all, the global south, when we talk about it post-colonial countries mostly. And when we are talking about post-colonial, the kind of colonial impact that it has had, like for example, Anglophone countries in Africa and in India, countries like India and other parts of Asia have a lot of cultural similarities with which you can work with. But when it comes to the Francophone or Lusophone, it's very different. So you have to overcome that as well. So like I said, so there are three different three sets of challenges that we have to overcome, and which I think we are overcoming very well. And I see that from a point of view of the implementation that we are doing in various parts. I can speak from an India perspective, is where we are looking not just at a bilateral way of addressing these issues at the global south, but at a multilateral level, working together and groups of countries working together to be able to be more successful in being able to help each other in this South-South cooperation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Puljal. But furthermore, you talked about the political, economic, and cultural differences. I would like to point out, first of all, like, for example, the political differences. I'll give an example. Within the East African community, we have a very vibrant community with the Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and a couple of others joining the bloc, like DRC. But one of the things that we have faced as a challenge is the final stage of integration, and that is a political federation. Every country has their own beliefs, their own history, and the political regime is different. You find some countries have laws that can ensure that the president stays in power for 2 terms. Others don't have that law. They have repealed it. And this has continually brought about a lot of conflict when it comes to integration. How do you think countries can overcome some of these political differences that hinder the other strategies like the economic growth and so on and so forth?
Political structures are difficult to navigate. They're not easy. There's no easy answer for that. And when we talk about it from a perspective of another global south country working, let's take example of DRC that you gave, and the rest of them, like what we are seeing in the Sahel lately. That is still an internal issue for those governments to deal with. This is according to my perspective. It doesn't, the others may have other perspectives on it. But I think that's an internal challenge that those countries need to work on themselves. See, at the end of the day, South-South cooperation doesn't mean that a major economy within the global south is going to go and tell another south country what they need to do. There are some things that you need to draw the line on. And these are some of the things that we can advise, that there are better modalities to follow in a political structure, but the major challenges of being able to run their countries the way they see fit is something that the people of that country have to decide for themselves. That is not something that another major economy in the global south, or even for that matter, a country in the global north, should interfere. That is for the countries to work on. But there certainly will be suggestions, there'll be certainly inputs that can be given from the other global south countries to speak to these countries which are facing, and who are we to say how they should run their countries, right? So that I feel is something that's it's a very good question you've asked, but the answer is very, very simple. It's for those countries to decide their own political structures for themselves according to what their people would want.
Much, Mr. Pujal. I commend the optimistic outlook on the challenges as opportunities and, of course, giving us some of the solutions that you think. My next question should be going to Mr. Pranjal Sharma. Mr. Pranjal, are you online? Mr. Pranjal, are you online?
Don't.
Well, as Mr. Pranjal joins us later on, I would like to pose a question to Dr. Mutizwa Shingai in South Africa. Dr. Shingai, I would like to ask you on the scope of the South-South cooperation. We do have another term, which is the North-South cooperation. We do have another term, which is the triangular cooperation, and some of these could be confusing to our viewers. Could you draw for us the line between what the North-South and the South-South cooperation and then the triangular terms really refer to?
Most certainly, Anthony. Well, since we have already spoken to the issue of South-South cooperation, but let me speak to the other dimensions. So when we speak of North-South cooperation, essentially we are speaking about the various partnerships and engagements that exist between countries of the global South, as I've mentioned, countries within Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, much of South Asia, and what we'd refer to as the global North. Countries such as, countries that fall within the parameters of the EU, the United States, Canada, would even include countries like Australia, Japan, New Zealand, to name but a few. So in essence, we speak to those kinds of connections, both at the political level. If we talk about a political level, we're talking obviously about diplomatic relations and other various political engagements. We are talking, of course, about maybe economic ties, which could fall in the purview of trade, development, economic technical assistance, and again, maybe to a lesser extent, social ties, cultural ties that may exist. Now, of course, one of the most recently, should I say, we've seen there are as it concerns the North-South partnerships, we have seen variants of it. One of the biggest ones we have, of course, is the African Growth and Opportunities Act, which essentially is an engagement between the African continent and the United States, which is designed to foster greater trade, greater cooperation, and, again, facilitate an ease of access of the U.S. market of African products and commodities. So that is one example. We also have what is touted or recently, or I guess you'd call the economic partnership agreements, which was really a relationship, an economic relationship again between the EU and Africa, which was essentially trying to create, or renegotiate trade terms and agreements between the African continent. This follows on from what had been the ACP agreements, which had brought the African, the Caribbean, as well as the Pacific countries in partnership with the European Union. So that's just an example of another North-South. Speaking to the issue of trilateralism or the triangular cooperation, as you had mentioned, essentially speaks to the cooperation not simply just between regions, but also between different sectoral partners. So it would be cooperation between, obviously, multilateral institutions, civil society, the private sector. So you can also conceptualize it and conceive it in that sense. Now, of course, the question may be, how does this prefigure within the broader argument of South-South trade? Well, one of the things that we have often said is that, if I can give you just an example, in the area of science, technology, and innovation, there's been a lot that has been going on the African continent. And one of the things is, how do we begin to harness these developments that are taking place within the science and technology sphere to the benefit of economic development. So you've had a number of institutions such as UNECA, in collaboration with UNESCO, as well as various other institutes, universities, as well as African governments that have been collaborating in various ways to come up with solutions, not just at the level of policy, but also at the level of actually coming up with tangible solutions to deal with key issues we have, concerning the Sustainable Development Goals. So, just to name a few, clean energy or energy security is one area where there's been this triangular cooperation. Health is another area where there's been a lot of research and collaboration that is currently taking place in the African continent, and this includes civil society, private sector, not just within the continent, but also from countries such as Singapore. We are talking countries such as Germany, United States to a lesser extent, and of course food security. That is also another area as well where this has been taking place. So this, just in a nutshell, are the areas where you can see examples of tangible aspects of what we call, or examples of what we call triangular cooperation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Shingai, and thank you so much, gentlemen. Mr. Tieno, thank you, Mr. Pujao. I would like to take a very short break. We're going to be joined by Mr. Sharma after the break, but thank you for the introductory exchange. We're going to now turn to multilateralism as a tool in the South-South cooperation. How and what is multilateralism doing at the level of the South-South cooperation and collaboration within the global South? My name is Anthony. This is Smart 24 TV. We return after this short break. Stay with us.
Smart 24, driving business.
These days, our homes are no longer just the places we live. It's where we attend meetings, go to class, keep each other safe, and entertain ourselves. To do this smoothly, you need a reliable internet connection. Buy the MTN WakaNet router, which connects up to 32 devices and gets a free 40 GB data bundle at only 149,000 shillings. Or buy the MTN WakaNet MiFi at only 75,000 shillings and enjoy a free 15 GB bundle to stream, study, work, and play on the go. Visit any MTN service center to buy the MTN WakaNet router or MiFi and enjoy the internet that does amazing things.
At Uganda Development Bank, we are committed to empowering communities by supporting projects that unlock excellent economic benefits for Ugandans through job creation, tax contribution, output value, and foreign exchange. We seek partnerships with projects that drive economic development in Uganda. Achaki Lodge is a remarkable story of fundamental change. Located in Kitgum municipality in what was once a town landfill, the story of Achaki Lodge is one of urban renewal and social impact, where the efforts of one development have transformed the lives of an entire community.
We are sitting in this nice place, which had a very bad history. A place which was a landfill or a dumping ground for the local authorities, and it is now transformed into a beautiful place.
We started building accommodation, which are rooms, but we decided to go for cottages. We did not go for these huge hotels of 50 rooms and something like that. So we built 10 cottages plus 2 luxury tents. And then we built a restaurant and the bar area, a kitchen restaurant area. And by the way, I must tell you, we started being creative there, we went for a children's park. We did something like a children's park because we started wanting to bring the community in. And children, we thought, is a very good source of drawing their parents to the facility.
UDB is proud to be part of Achaki's journey of growth. With our support and tailored financial solutions, Achaki Lodge was able to develop a modern hotel block with a conference hall and modern amenities often reserved for city center establishments in Kampala.
One of our main aim was also to make sure that we give back to our society. The people of Alango West, where we are situated, had problem in accessing electricity from town because there was about 3 and 3.5 kilometers. But through the Alpha Center project, we managed to acquire a transformer, a 33 kV to low voltage transformer, and we tapped power before it has even reached the main substation in Kitgum town. And water. If you saw around, the old people there were actually relying on boreholes. Unfortunately, because of the dumping site, most of the boreholes were not pure water. They were infested. But now we have brought the National Water and Sewage Corporation line, and people who can afford are benefiting from there.
Most importantly, this development has created jobs, catalyzed investment around the area, and hastened the delivery of electricity and water utilities to this location to serve people in the community and surrounding areas.
We have no power here. Even my almost no, we have no power. The power center here, so it means we are very happy.
We had to employ the people within nearby where they just walk from their homes coming to work. So the second one also, the decision was made that we should get credit suppliers where the people, community around.
Like for me, I've started working with them, I'm benefiting, I'm seeing even they have changed my moving forward.
When I came here, many times I was working out, but I could not settle myself well. But when I came here, in these 2 years, at least I've settled myself. I have a farm family, and then I'm building my small guest house out of the money I get from here. Wow. My saving.
At Uganda Development Bank, building capacity, social and economic impact for all Ugandans is at the heart of what we do. It is critical to the goal of building a Uganda that works for everyone, as our mission is to improve the quality of life of Ugandans.
As we celebrate Uganda's Independence Diamond Jubilee anniversary, Uganda Development Bank renews its commitment to continue inspiring more development in Uganda.
Uganda Development Bank, inspiring development.
Smart 24, driving business.
Right now. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this second segment of a special edition of the South-South Corporation Day. Today is the 12th of September, and we are celebrating the South-South Corporation. And I'm with a very interesting gentleman, another gentleman joining us from Geneva right now. Mr. Pranjal Sharma has just made into the call. And then have Mr. Andrew Otieno, an economist here in Uganda, who is very, very passionate about integration And as well, I have Mr. Puljal, who is in New Delhi right now, very great social scientist there. And then Dr. Shingai in Cape Town, in South Africa right now. I don't know if it's Cape Town or something. But I would like to hear from Mr. Pranjal Sharma. Mr. Pranjal Sharma is a very passionate author as well. He is an analyst as well, an economic analyst, so to say. And he's also an author mainly focused on globalization, technology, and inclusive growth. Today, we are going to be having a very special moment with him as he tells us about his new book called The Next New, right? That is The Next New. And the title also continues to Navigating the Fifth Industrial Revolution. Very fascinating indeed, a title to have. Mr. Pranjal, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to join. I have been traveling for a while and, and talking about it. And I must tell you, I was in Johannesburg for the BRICS Summit, and then, of course, the G20 Summit. And it's very fascinating that the focus on South-South cooperation is happening, and the Global South as a concept is being recognized at some of the biggest multilateral forums. So I think it is now a good time for us to focus on that. And I must show you, this is the book that I have. This is called The Next New, the Navigating the Fifth Industrial Revolution. And the premise is very simple, and is that there is a $25 trillion shift or creative destruction of business models which is happening across the world. And when I say across the world, it is impacting, everybody. So countries in Africa, countries in Asia, countries in Europe and North America are on the same arc of change. The configuration may change, but the change is the same. There are three forces which are changing every business model, which creates an opportunity. One is, of course, emerging technologies. Now, emerging technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, as you know, from IoT to artificial intelligence to drones, they are very democratic, they're egalitarian. All of us have access to it, and it's up to us to develop the solutions for our own problems. So these technologies can help us solve for ourselves. We don't have to wait for somebody else to solve our problem anymore. It used to be in the 70s and 80s, and ask for technology from another country and hope that that technology will help us in our country. But today, the fascinating thing about these technologies is that we can solve, so we can have education on the technology platform, we can have health services on technology platform, we can have skilling services, and beyond entrepreneurship. So technology is one big force, sustainable behavior is another big force, and third big force is social impact. So whatever we do, it has to take care of the society. As a result, as the book has mentioned, there is a big change which is going on across the world. Now, this is an opportunity for the Global South to make a difference. I also say that we have now described these in a different way. The world has to be described in a new way. I say there are two categories. There are legacy economies and there are growth economies. Legacy economies are in the global north, as it were. They are in Europe, North America, maybe the OECD countries. Growth economies is where we all are, which is where Africa is, where Asia is, where Latin America is. This is where the center of gravity of the global GDP is shifting. And therefore, I think this is an opportunity for us in the Global South to create new structures and frameworks to collaborate, to share each other's experiences of solving problems and challenges that we have, because the challenges that we have are very unique to us. We cannot use an example which is in Europe and completely paste it on ourselves. We will have to find out, and even within the grand big continent like Africa, the challenges in North Africa would be different from East Africa, would be different from Southern Africa. But this opportunity in the next new world of fifth industrial revolution, which is a caring revolution, is that how can we create solutions for our local challenges? So I'll pause here and request you for another thought.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Pranjal Sharma. But before we go further to our next discussion, we introduced the South-South Cooperation in the first segment, and we needed your submission, especially on technology, the contribution of technology. First of all, you are a very great commentator on technology globally, and you have done a lot in as far as pushing technological advancement, especially in the southern countries, like we've mentioned. Would you say that technology has deepened deepened relations, especially between the global South countries, especially in Africa, Asia, like you've mentioned, and Latin America, or has it contributed to the ever-growing dissimilarities of this dynamic group of nations?
It's a very good question. I think technology has to be described in a different way. I don't believe it's about high tech or low tech. I believe it is about effective technology. Effective means whatever can solve my problem is effective technology. I think it is not creating a divide, but what it is doing is there are new models of technology being used for social and financial inclusion which are coming into play. We saw the launch of M-Pesa in East Africa. Similarly, India has gone ahead and created several examples of public digital infrastructure. We have a health infrastructure platform. We are creating a common digital marketplace for e-commerce. We are also creating a situation where we have been able to allow a lot of people to use financial transactions. You must have heard that we have now more than last just few years, 4 or 5 years, we have created 500 million new bank accounts for people who were not part of the global mainstream, of the financial mainstream. And if we had waited for the large global banks or the traditional banks to bring these people into the financial fold, it would not have been possible. We did it through digital finance and digital banking. Similar challenges exist in Africa. We can use that model to do it. We cannot use the European model of financial inclusion where you set up a giant bank and each bank opens up a branch in a local community. That is not the way to do it. It can be done, but it's very slow and very expensive. Ours have to do it at a very fast pace. I like to use the phrase leapfrogging because we have to leapfrog over our challenges with new to bring people to the main. My belief is that if countries in the global south can collaborate and share experiences and share models, we don't have to share technologies, we have to share models of use, because AI-based solutions is not a technology to be sold. It is a technology model which can be adopted by another country, and it can be customized to the local requirements. So I believe that technology has a tremendous power in education, health, skilling, entrepreneurship, to be able to ensure that we are able to share a lot of good ideas.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Pranjal Sharma, there joining us. Later on, you will be telling us more about this new book, The Next New. Sounds so interesting and fascinating. I would want to get a copy of myself at the end of this. But let's now get back to Dr. Shingai Mutizwa. We want to talk about the aspect of multilateralism, and this is a term certainly that is used when it comes to South-South cooperation. Dr. Mutizwa, it is often said that the South-South cooperation is an exercise of multilateralism, and this comes up all the time. We're talking about South-South cooperation. What exactly is multilateralism, and could you explain for our viewers the structure of the South-South cooperation today?
No, certainly, Anthony. Well, as you know, the foundation of South-South cooperation is largely based within the idea of international cooperation between different countries. Now, multilateralism is distinct, obviously, from other forms of cooperation, such as bilateralism and unilateralism. Bilateralism refers to that type of cooperation that occurs between two different countries at whatever level, whether it be political, economic, and social. Unilateralism, of course, speaks more to the actions of an individual state, irrespective of the response of the other party. It's usually a unitary decision taken by a particular party, whereas multilateralism rather speaks to the cooperation between multiple states or a large number of states, and not just states, but actually international institutions. So you're talking about, for example, an example of one form of multilateral cooperation would be, if we take it, for example, the African Development Bank. This is one form of multilateral cooperation. Obviously, it's in the form of an institution. But of course, here you have a number of African states who banded together for the basis of saying we need to create a financial institution that would be for the benefit of helping to finance key development objectives on the continent, whether it was infrastructure, whether it was in agriculture. So that is just to give you an example of what multilateralism is. Now, of course, how did this South-South cooperation come about? Well, of course, as you know, following the Second World War, or rather, should we say, in the aftermath of the Second World War, when a number of countries around the world were actually decolonizing, both starting off with India and Pakistan, and then coming here into Africa with Ghana and a number of other countries in West Africa and East Africa in the 1960s. There was a realization that in the midst of this Cold War, where countries were either forced to choose one side, the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc, there were those countries who were of the opinion that they should be non-aligned, and that essentially that given their common history, given their common developmental objectives, that it was better to band together and to cooperate on a raft of different issues. Now, this particular form of cooperation crystallized, of course, into what we know as the non-aligned movement. And I think the key architects of that were obviously among them the late Jawaharlal Nehru. We had, of course, Kwame Nkrumah. We also had Nasser, of course, of Egypt, and Tito, of course, Broz Tito, of course, of the former Yugoslavia. So you had this sort of kind of cooperation. This eventually crystallized into what we knew later on as the G77, or the Group of 77, which actually again brought together additional countries from the global south to cooperate, and actually on various issues. Now, one of the issues within which they cooperated was, of course, this issue of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. As we said, in the midst of the Cold War, where there was an unsustainable arms race between East and West, countries within this particular band or grouping of the non-aligned movement had actually committed themselves to this non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. This particular stance culminated in what we know as the nuclear treaty ban, and also the Treaty of Pelindaba, which took place in 1996. And this was adopted by a number of African countries. And this actually transformed the African Union into a nuclear-free zone. So this is one example of where there's been some collaboration. But what we can also say is that South-South cooperation is an expression, is this expression of multilateralism. And I think for us, in particular, it has been good in the sense that, one, it has also helped to facilitate the exchange of best practice. I think extent that a lot of technical assistance and cooperation has taken place. We have had a lot of flows of technology, a lot of flows of technical knowledge coming from the more developed economies of the global south, countries such as India, countries such as China, Malaysia. And this has been, gaining a lot of traction within the African continent and, beyond into other regions as well of the Global South.
So much, Dr. Shingai, for that very detailed answer on multilateralism. Now, I'd like to turn to Mr. Abilash. Mr. Abilash, today, when you look at the initiatives like Dr. Shingai has mentioned in multilateralism and South-South cooperation, one of the center stage topics is resource mobilization. And one of the keys to the cooperation, the multilateral talks and multilateral agreements is where are we going to get the resources? In your view, Mr. Abilash, could you enlighten us on some of the modes of resource mobilization or how these South-South cooperation members can be able to raise funds or finance different projects in order to achieve the goals we have under the South-South cooperation?
Sorry, thank you, Anthony. The source of funding historically has been mostly post-colonial times. It has been handouts that were being given by the Global North countries, the former colonizers to the Global South countries. We've seen that across the world, especially in Africa, Asia. It has been a norm where a lot of handouts have been given. But that has changed quite a bit ever since when we started looking at the South countries also being able to provide that kind of financial support. We've seen that very much with China in implementing a lot of infrastructure projects across Africa, across Latin America, and also across various parts of Asia. And also we've seen, for example, India. India has a lot of lines of credit under its belt for working with the various countries in Africa and the other parts of the South-South region. But a new thing that's also been happening in the past few years is the North-South way of financing projects and implementation of technology, various strategies for various sectors, be it health, be it trade, aid for trade, or even for that matter in the education space. One of the examples I can give you, or rather two examples that I have worked I can give you, is on a trilateral that was between the UK, India, and Africa called SITA, Supporting India's Trade and Investments for Africa. Andrew also was a part of that initial design that we put together, that we conceptualized for the UK. So what it basically did was the UK bringing in the finance, the Global North country bringing in the finance, while we had India and countries in in Africa, especially Eastern Africa and the Horn of Africa, being able to exchange and have trade between the countries, one. Two is to be able to bring in technology and capacity building from India into these identified countries. There were 5 countries in Eastern Africa and the Horn of Africa. So then similarly, there's another program, again with India, which is there for Asia and Africa, with the other Global North country, Japan, India, and Africa, which is called the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, where it also looks at various capacity building and funding coming in from the Global North, from Japan in this case. Similarly, European Union is looking at something similar with Francophone Africa. And interestingly, what we are also seeing lately is a lot of private sector investment that also would like to come and work between the countries in the Global South. So, for example, in India, a lot of businesses have been working with British entities, they've been working with German entities, various entities in the West, in the Global North, for that matter. But now they want to look at other opportunities. The opportunities lie in the Global South, in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, other parts of South Asia. So now you have this new interest that is coming out to look at these Global South countries where the populations are also large enough, the markets are huge, the potential for investment, for the ROIs to be higher. So that's where the new opportunities are coming from the private sector. So like I said, so there is potential. Again, going back to the multilaterals, you have the African Development Bank, the African Exim Bank, and the likes, and the Asian Development Bank in this part, and the other multilateral bigger banks. But there is also a lot of interest and lot of opportunities that we can tap into, especially in the global south from the private sector. And that's where I think we need to concentrate on. And I think Pranjal writes about that also in his book, and he speaks about that the private sector is very, very key for financing most of these things that we want to do in the global south.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Bilash, for that wonderful submission and insights into some of the financing modes that we have for ourselves. Now we have to take a very short break, and unfortunately I'm going to bring in Mr. Otieno after the break, but we want to discuss some of the events that governments can leverage from the South-South cooperation. And before we go into that, Mr. Otieno will also tell us how governments within the South-South cooperation can be able to collaborate in efforts to ensure that this agenda, especially the SDG of 2030, we are already halfway through, and the summit is just around the corner, and now we are talking about the South-South Cooperation Day. What are the efforts that governments can also put in to ensure that this comes to a successful end? My name is Anthony. We are taking a very short breather. Stay with us. Don't touch your dial. We'll be right back.
Smart 24, driving business.
Luxury redefined at Seasand Hotel as you indulge in the splendor of elegant living fit for the royalty that you are. Step into comfort, pampering and blissful customer-centric service as you select from our range of comfy exquisite living quarters furnished to meet with your royal preference. Surrounded by scenic beauty, our tropical setting allows you to escape the glamorous ordeal of city life. Our ambient green gardens will guide you to a place of revitalizing rest. The 3-star restaurant caters to your palate, serving your choice menu stronger with each story we tell. African Perspective, driving business and trade across Africa. Don't miss the African Perspective in Smart 24 every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at exactly 6 p.m. East African Standard Time as we drive business and trade across Africa. Download the Smart Digital app on Play Store and enjoy your favorite TV shows, documentaries, and radio in your palm on the go.
Smart 24, driving business.
Most welcome back. Thank you so much for once again tuning in into Smart 24 TV. We are live on YouTube at Smart 24 TV. We're also live on DSTV and GOTV channels. That is 372 and 320 respectively. So you can catch us there. You can also give us feedback through our Twitter. That's Twitter handle is at Smart 24 TV now. And thank you so much to the guys bringing in the comments. We have John Moons from Nairobi. We have Jackson Munguchi, who is saying he's enjoying the content here. We have Becky Shali, who is watching in from Kampala as well. Thank you so much, and we really do appreciate your time. And now we're getting back to our discussion. The South-South Cooperation Day is here, and it's today, on the 12th of September. And I'm with Mr. Pranjal Sharma, Mr. Punjal as well, and Mr. Otieno Andrew, as well as Dr. Shingai, discussing the importance of the South-South cooperation as well as the challenges. Mr. Otieno, before we go into the next discussion, I would like to know about how African governments are able to, first of all, work through the rights, negotiating their rights with the global north as well as within the global south, and which is better for any side? Is it negotiating our rights on the global north side or within the global south countries? Mr.
Thank you very much, Anthony. This is a question that usually becomes an issue of contention in very many audiences. I'm one of those people, fortunately or unfortunately, who's not going to try to sugarcoat things for people. But a direct response to that would be, with the global north, we definitely have no rights whatsoever. That said, with all due respect, I don't have to get into issues of colonialism. I don't have to get into technicalities of the Bretton Woods and other instances where negotiations with the global north have definitely brought us a lot of unneeded disadvantage. There have been historical issues in the past that we definitely could have avoided, particularly in dealing with the global north. I don't have to get into country specificities and mention institutions such as the World Bank, but in the process of negotiations with the global north, history has it written on the wall for us. We definitely can look into the records to know what has happened there, but I don't intend to rile up any controversy. Regarding issues of the global south, I would actually like to go back to a response that raised my eyebrows. You posed a question to Mr. Puljal, and he said something along the lines of the fact that there's no reason why a country such as India should be getting into the politics of countries in Africa. Thank you very much, Mr. Puljal. That is highly appreciated. That's the reason why we appreciate South-South collaboration much more. We need to take special note of the fact that we have similar histories. We can both empathize and sympathize with each other at the same time. There's no reason why China, for example, they're becoming a very strong partner. The Indians are becoming have always been, I should say, not becoming. There's a lot that we can do in collaboration with each other based on the fact that we have similar histories, we have similar aspirations, particularly regarding the SDGs. We can see eye to eye. We're reading from the same page in more ways than one. Therefore, put succinctly, with the Global North, I'm not very much a champion of negotiations from that aspect of things. The history books are on the table for us to discover what disadvantages we have suffered. With the Global South, the countries of Africa itself, amongst ourselves on the African continent, countries in Asia, countries in Latin America, there is definitely a lot for us to gain. They have gone through experiences, and what they have achieved till this point, ahead of us a little bit, economically, technologically, infrastructure, etc. But we have a lot more to learn from the countries of the Global South than we do with countries of the Global North. In a nutshell, therefore, with the Global North, they bring the conditions to the table and we go according to what they say we should follow. With the countries of the Global South, we've had very good experiences with them. We do have negotiating leeway, and we're looking forward to working with them much more in the long term.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Otieno there. You talk about the solidarity that the southern countries should really have, and also believing that they can achieve more on their own and without very much influence from all these other parties. Now, I'd like to bring in Mr. Sharma on this one. Dr. Shingai broke down for us the structure of the cooperation here in terms of the South-South cooperation and multilateralism. Would you care to highlight for us what shapes multilateralism in the South-South cooperation? You have a lot of experience in trying to negotiate some of these policies, analyzing some of these policies, especially economic-wise. But what do you think shapes multilateralism when it comes to the South-South cooperation, especially given the fact that we are celebrating it today on the 12th of September?
Well, Anthony, I think that multilateralism is important, but I am also slightly skeptical of creating new structures or institutions which can become bureaucratic, and often they exist only because they create rules and processes, but the outcomes are always in question. And I think the Global South has suffered from these global multilateral institutions which have not delivered what the Global South expected. So we have, for example, under BRICS, we've created a bank, and that bank has done some work and brought some money. But I think we will have to sit down and think very seriously about what these multilateral cooperation can be. Abhilash gave some good examples where different countries came up with different models and different inputs to resolve the needs of specific sectors, in agriculture sector, for example. But I think this is a time where we have to, in the Global South, sit and think about it in the same way that the Western world thought about a new order in the post-war era. This is a time when we have to sit and say, what kind of institutions can we create which are supportive but are not bureaucratic, which are meant to deliver the requirements and bring countries together, but they do not become a law unto themselves, which actually slows down development. So I think we have to also learn from the mistakes of the multilateral institutions and the failures of various elements of the multilateral institutions of the last 75 years in the post-war era. So I don't have an answer yet, but what I can say for sure that when we have new structures, we have to look at new ideas. We can begin by saying that how can, let's say, regions, how can East Africa support each countries within each other? How can Southern African countries work with each other? What can we learn from East Asia? What can East Asia learn from Latin America? I think there are existing blocks over there. There are economic blocks. There's Mercosur in Latin America. There's ASEAN. There's EAC. So there is a lot of opportunity for existing blocks to work with each other. These are already multilateral institutions. I'm not in favor of creating new structures because sometimes the cost is high. It sounds very good. It looks optically very impressive. But does it actually deliver? I'm not sure. So I'll close on the point that we need to focus on objectives and outcomes. So pick up one sector, for example, and say, what does that sector need? And how can a certain group of countries, based on their expertise and needs, come together to solve that problem? If you have a challenge in finance, you can say, okay, out of these group of 100 Global South countries, which country has the best idea and solution? How can we put that across? So this kind of discussion has to be done in an agile, in a nimble way, through a constant dialogue and a willingness to contribute, rather than spending all our time and energy in creating an institution which may or may not deliver.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Pranjal, for your answer. But still, just in line with your response, we want to talk about what the current status quo of the South-South cooperation is like at the moment. In your own view, looking at the current state of affairs with what we have so far, halfway through the SDG agenda that is of 2030, what is the status quo of the South-South cooperation today? You have, of course, a lot of experience also working with technologies across most of these southern countries, and you've experienced personally what is on ground. What can you tell us about the progress of the South-South cooperation?
Well, I think South-South cooperation has existed, and if I can be very frank with you, and we have to be very, very clear in our diagnosis before we proceed to resolve a problem, right? So if we assume that everything is fine, then we don't even try to resolve the issue. So we have to first identify what the key issues are. In my view, one of the biggest issue is that the trade and investment between South-South cooperation is not as it should be. It has to increase. Right now, a lot of the trade and investment is between South and the North. But within the South, it's very low. Within the North, it is very high. Within the North and South, it's high. But within the South, it's the lowest. And I'm sure Abhilash and Shingai will add to that point as well. But for trade and investment to take place, what is required? The fundamental need is investing in infrastructure. We need in the Global South to just focus on building economic infrastructure in each of our countries. Build roads, ports, airlines, connectivity, etc. Once you have that, a lot of the challenges will be resolved. I mean, it is still amazing that there are situations where importing products into our countries is cheaper than sending goods within the country. I have some estimates that even within Africa, the cost of logistics for one product can be as high as 40%, while average it should not be more than 10%. So the point is that South-South cooperation will remain only a dialogue or a slogan unless you spend 10 years in investing in very fundamental economic infrastructure. Unless you are able to do that, we will keep hoping to have cooperation. Some help will be given and provided, and we will support each other, but it will not be effective enough to improve people's lives and social and economic development. My suggestion to leaders of the Global South is come together first to ensure that you invest in economic infrastructure, you invest in digital infrastructure. If you are able to do this, then South-South cooperation will have a meaning. Otherwise, it will just be a slogan.
Wow, very rightly put, Mr. Sharma. Thank you so much for your response. I would like to turn to Dr. Shingai right now on the G20 summit. The recently concluded G20 summit saw a lot of members come in with a lot of ideas, and one of them was the South-South cooperation. Dr. Shingai, what is your What is your view on this G20 summit's outcome this year and the G20 New Delhi leaders' declaration? Also, as you are a subject expert on this one, what do you think is the take home for the G20 membership, and especially in terms of the efforts that the South-South cooperation is making for the Global South, generally speaking?
No, thank you for that, Anthony. Well, of course, I think the G20 summit, I think, was historic in a number of ways. I mean, most, of course, evidently in the inclusion of the African Union as an additional member into the bloc. As you know, the G20 in its founding in was actually created to actually deal with the key issues, key economic issues. More recently, of course, it took on greater prominence in the wake of the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Now, what we can say is one of the outcomes for this is that there were a number of key issues that were addressed. One of the things that we saw, at least in terms of the outcomes of the final document that was produced, one was on the need for having a sustainable and balanced growth. The second was on the need of accelerating progress, particularly on the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a key pillar, of South-South cooperation, even here within the continent. It's one of the key things. If you look at Agenda 2063, it's one of the key things which the continent has committed itself. The other issue, of course, has been the idea of this what we call the green development for a sustainable future. So again, putting back into place the strengthening commitments towards climate change and things like that has been an important thing. It has also gone further, I think, to reinvigorate multilateralism. One of the key issues or concerns prior to the G20 summit was, again, this idea about the declining importance of G20, of course, particularly in the wake of or in the rise of BRICS. But I think with this most successful summit that was held by Prime Minister Modi, of course, we have seen that the G20 has firmly established itself again as a very relevant organ of multilateralism, and again one that is designed to champion the aspirations of developing countries within the Global South. So that is the key thing that it has done, invigorating. The other thing of course, is it has put a lot of emphasis on technological transformation, particularly in the domain. As I had mentioned at the beginning, one of the areas that there's been a lot of cooperation, of course, has been around these issues of science, technology, and innovation, particularly in the way of policy development and creating a conducive regulatory environment within which we can actually harness a lot of these technological transformations, for instance, like nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, etc. Nanotechnology in particular, because it's a technology that we have seen is being harnessed, particularly in Eastern Africa, for the realization of certain SDGs, such as public healthcare, or access to clean water, food security and agricultural development, as well as energy efficiency and energy security. So that is a key thing. It also has committed itself. One of the key outcomes also has been on this issue of terrorism and money laundering. As you know, here in Africa, one of the key challenges that had been to try and address this issue of illicit financial flows. So again, the fact that this has now actually also been put as a key issue, or one of the key issues, as part of the G Summit, again, is also a reflection that the issues that we have as an African continent are also being recognized as being global issues or global challenges. Of course, and I think one other key thing which we should not also, which is very important and which should not be overlooked, is on issues concerning gender parity. I think for us, we have seen, and I think broadly speaking, within the domain of international relations, there is a recognition that states where there is, states that enjoy greater gender equality are less likely to be embroiled in conflict. So I think the recognition of this particular aspect has been particularly crucial, particularly in the wake of what we have seen in the continent with conflicts which have been raging on and that sort of thing. Of course, as my colleague Abhilash had mentioned before, we have seen obviously in the Sahel region, we have seen that there's been quite a bit of turmoil, that has been taking place. But again, these issues of gender, gender equality also speak to some of these issues that we are talking about. So I think there's quite a few outcomes. It's going to be difficult, obviously, to dissect them in detail here, but I think these are some of the key takeaways. But one thing I'd like to say, Anthony, before I go is that one thing that we can say about another crucial aspect of this conference has been the idea that global governance, is this idea that global governance should be a much more representative and much more effective and accountable feature. And I think this is what the G20 has tried to, this particular summit has tried to highlight and try to achieve. We see that in other fora, for instance, particularly we still have the calls for reform, right, within the United Nations, particularly the Security Council. We are still clamoring for the inclusion of the African Union to have a permanent. At least with the G20, there is a starting point for us all. So these are some of the important outcomes. Of course, any time, if be, in terms of the level of success that we can actually, that would be able to measure. But I think it is very encouraging, if I may say, a very encouraging start. If for instance, we in the African continent, I think if now we were to now sort of adjust or reform our own institutions, particularly in the way of governance, I think this could go a long way in actually facilitating or helping us to actually leverage the benefits that we hope to derive from this particular inclusion in the G20.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful submission. Thank you so much, Dr. Shingai. I want to get Mr. Othienu's perspectives on this. But before I do that, Mr. Pujal, I would like to know your perspective of the G20 summit this year. What is India's take home from the G20 summit ahead, of course, of now the next one, as we are seeing now that the African Union now is part of the G20, which is a very, very interesting fact. What is India's takeaway from this year's G20 summit?
Thank you. I think it's been a very successful summit. We were all quite enthralled following the G20 summit, the way it was going forward. And I think there are lots of outcomes that have come out of the G20 summit, which I think Shingai has very, eloquently mentioned here. Some of the things that I think from a South-South point of view, if we really, I'm only going to talk about that. There's many more that things have come, including the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor that we want to build. There are lots of other things. Again, that's South-North kind of initiative that has been discussed and signed on. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting that came about was the Global Biofuels Initiative. It's very important that we look at it, keeping in mind the kind of climate change challenges that we are facing. Let's be very honest here. I mean, when it comes to looking at greenhouse emissions, the developing countries are also very much a part of that group of countries that are emitting a lot of greenhouse emissions. But if we can work together with technologies that we have come up within India, and also to take on technologies that other global South countries can work together with, I think we can really come out with a solution which will benefit from a climate change perspective. And I think that's something that was that was debated very closely in the G20. And also, we were just talking about the Sahel region, the terrorism, the money laundering. So these were some of the things that were also discussed, which also becomes very important, especially for us in the global south, because these are challenges that we really need to tackle. And this is something that India had in the agenda during the G20 summit on cooperation on terrorism and money laundering and cryptocurrency, which I think needs a lot of policy, frameworks to be put in place. And of course, we also discussed about strengthening our multilateralism, and this whole thing about new multilateral institutions. I totally echo Pranjal's sentiment that it's going to create more bureaucracy, it's going to create more layers for us to work with if we don't really come out with having proper objectives and outcomes. And with that, I think is where India is also working towards. India is not just working towards coming up with something just because we want to. It's been very well thought out. If you even see the declaration that which a lot of Western media spoke about not being successful, we won't have a declaration, but we had something right off the bat immediately. So I think India has been putting a lot of thought into it. India is looking at a much larger picture when it comes to working with the world order that we have today. Not just working with the global south, but also working with the global north. We have seen the corridor, the economic corridor that I just mentioned. So India is looking for a much bigger picture of its involvement in global geopolitics. It was unfortunate we didn't have the president of China this time. I think it was a lost opportunity for China to be able to put their points across. And India is taking the lead all the way. And I think that's... and then there are also a lot of similarities. If you see even what has happened between G20 and the BRICS, the main similarity is expansion in both bodies. We've seen new countries joining in BRICS. We've seen the African Union joining in G20. India has been pushing for that. India is saying, we need more people to talk about these issues that we all need to assess. Today we have India reaching the moon, on the southern pole, and it's a historical movement. So that means we are now, and the line that we talk about, the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is one world, one family, that we spoke about during G20, is really what India wants to look at. I mean, when we are looking at the universe as where we want to expand, I think India is really leading that charge for us, not just South-South, but a global leadership. And, we're very excited about that.
Mr. Puljal, Bilash, we're going to take our last break. We return very briefly with the parting shots of our guests. And one of them will be, of course, a conclusion on the matters concerning South-South Cooperation Day, but also we'll be closing up with a new book with Mr. Sharma there, the author of the Fifth Industrial Revolution. My name is Anthony. We'll be right back after this very short break. Stay with us.
Smart 24, driving business.
Yogera neddembe wefunire MTN Freedom Bundles ezitaliko komo nyiga star noti star biremo hashi oba kozesa my MTN app ofune bundle bweziti endala awamu tewali kitulema.
Say goodbye to paperwork and travel costs. Now every MTN customer can register to invest in securities anytime and anywhere with Zabu in a few simple steps. Step 1. dial *292#. Step 2, select option 1, register with Zabu. Step 3, enter your full names. Step 4, enter your national identification number. Step 5, enter your national identification card number. In 24 hours, you will receive an SMS confirming your registration. Congratulations, you are now ready to invest.
Smart 24, driving business.
In a world where trade drives economic growth and development, Africa is now embracing a new era of intracontinental trade through the African Continental Free Trade Area to unleash its immense potential. Witness the spirit of entrepreneurship as African businesses forge a way into partnership and venture beyond their borders in a single African market. Discover the innovative solutions being initiated and created to address challenges and seize opportunities in sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and technological advancements. We expand our lens to showcase the efforts and success of economic integration across the entire African continent, from West Africa to East Africa, North Africa to Southern Africa, Central Africa, and even the diaspora, as the tapestry of unity grows stronger with each story we tell. African perspective, driving business and trade across Africa. Don't miss the African Perspective in Smart 24 every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 6 p.m. East African Standard Time as we drive business and trade across Africa. Download the Smart Digital app on Play Store and enjoy your favorite TV shows, documentaries, and radio in your palm on the go.
Smart 24, driving business.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for staying with us at Smart 24 TV, where we drive your business. We are talking the South-South Cooperation Day, and with Dr. Shingai, who just left the call right now because of a lecture. But we also have Mr. Otieno Andrew, and as well as Mr. Sharma Pranjal, and then we have Mr. Abhilash Pujal. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sticking with us since the beginning of the show. Now, as we wind down this final segment, Mr. Otieno, I want to get your thoughts, first of all, on what the southern countries can do in order to leverage the South-South cooperation for, first of all, job creation and also furthering their incomes. But also, Mr. Otieno, I would like to get your thoughts on the G20 summit. Mr. Abhilash just mentioned there what India reaped from there, and they said they took the center stage there at the G20 summit, and then the African Union also getting admitted into the G20. A lot of events really to celebrate, and also China's shunning of the event, or Mr. Xi Jinping not attending that particular event. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Otieno?
Thank you, Anthony. My colleague spoke about the admission of the African Union as a member of the G20. Let me not get into that. If I spoke about it with the passion I have for regional integration, being the Pan-Africanist that I am, I would speak for the next 30 minutes, so I won't even go there. I would like to use this opportunity, however, to congratulate India. The dynamics of geopolitics is changing, and India has proved that clearly. To be honest with you, India deserves a standing ovation from the world. Just like Mr. Puljal said, there was a lot of skepticism regarding this G20 event. There was a lot of media circulating about the fact that it wouldn't be adopted, there wouldn't be a declaration. Something would definitely go wrong, not with Russia having, with the war between Russia and Ukraine going on at the moment. However, the manner in which it definitely was a great success, without me getting into the details, not just a great success, but India is actually, just like Abhilash is saying, illustrating to the rest of the world that they intend to work with the world as a global family by admitting the African Union. That was definitely a very big step. We owe India, we owe the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, a huge debt of gratitude. It goes to show also, let me use this opportunity to mention the fact, to Africans especially, there is strength in numbers. It is not a coincidence that the African Union is becoming a member of the G20, especially while we have the African Continental Free Trade Area at play. We have a much bigger, let me to put it simply, we have a much bigger game we are playing amongst ourselves as Africans, which is the AFCFTA, and then with the rest of the world seeing how serious we're becoming amongst ourselves, they find the feasibility to actually invite us to the G20. That's a big thing. Seems like it might not have much significance at the moment, but without getting into too much detail, our admission to the G20 is the beginning of a very long story. It hasn't happened coincidentally. Bear in mind the fact that we're trying to put our African continental free trade area together. Much more I could say on that, but no time to get into those details. I would like to get into the issue of how South-South countries could benefit from. In a nutshell, if there's one area that I would like to concentrate on or focus on, it is agriculture. Very many countries in the global South, India, China, and several others, have advanced their agricultural practices to the extent that there's a lot we can learn from them. What Africa is trying to do at the moment, it's to scale up regarding modernization of agriculture, digitalization of agriculture, taking our agricultural practices and what we get from agriculture, specifically agriculture, to the next step. There's a lot that countries of the South have achieved, and there's a lot that we can learn from them, bearing in mind the South-South cooperation. And from that aspect of things, without having mentioned other sectors that would take too much time for me to do so, but from the agriculture perspective, there's a lot we can gain from our southern partners, and there's a lot more income we can generate from a collaboration along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thieno. Thank you so much for that patriotic heart for the African continent, but also for the regional integration within Africa and the rest of the southern part of the world. Now, I want to turn to Mr. Sharma. Mr. Sharma, could you just give us your last shots on, first of all, the South-South cooperation, but then as well as your new book, The Next New, The Fifth Industrial Revolution. Would just like to know where we can find that book, first of all, because it sounds like a must read, especially for everyone within the countries we have just mentioned and for our dear viewers. Mr. Sharma, if you could please give us your final shots.
Thank you, Anthony. So just to also comment on G20, I think it's important that G20 has recognized and included African Union. I don't think, if you're talking about inclusive growth, all continents need to play a part, and all growth economies, as I mentioned earlier. Legacy economies have to now recognize that growth economies is where the real action is. That's where the growth is. That's where, the innovation is happening. That's where the real demand is. On one point to what Andrew said, I think the free trade agreement in Africa is brilliant. But again, I would reiterate that trade and investment need the wheels of economic infrastructure. Without that, the cost of trade and investment will be very high. So the first step for ensuring that the free trade agreement and the continental trade agreement is to make sure that investment in basic logistics and infrastructure has to be enough. You see, this is the book. I'll show it again for our viewers. Which is the book is about the fact that we are in a complete new phase of growth. The fourth industrial revolution, Anthony, was only about cost and efficiency. The company was saying that let's use technology, reduce our cost, improve efficiency, do everything faster and better. But people forgot about the impact it was happening to everybody else. So this book, The Next New, The Fifth Industrial Revolution, really is about the fact that we have to care about people and planet and not just profit. So which means that technology has to serve the people. Technology has to serve the planet. If technology is not able to serve the people or the planet, then that technology is useless. Technology can not be used only for improving somebody's profit. Profit will come sometimes at the cost of the planet. Profit sometimes comes at the cost of people. So we have to, I'm not saying that we have to be socialist, but we have to say that when you create something new, you have to say that, look, I have to do in a sustainable way. Technology can help us improve our sustainable practices. Technology can help improve the quality of life of people. Also, technology has a lot of harm potential. So generative AI, fake videos, etc., have concerned a lot of people, from United Nations General Secretary General to various governments. They're all collaborating to say, how can we control AI? Why? Because AI is like the discovery of fire. You know, fire can burn us down completely, but if it's channelized properly, fire can heat our homes, it can provide us with food. It is so useful. In the fifth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence has to be controlled, managed, and channelized, and therefore we need very good regulation. This is what the book is about.
Sorry about that, Mr. Sharma. I think you're giving us a little bit about the most important thing when it comes to technology nowadays. That is artificial intelligence, and you'll be back just to finish that. But I'd just like to call upon yes, Mr. Sharma, you're back. You can conclude with your point before I move to Mr. Abishal.
Sorry, I don't know what point I was disconnected, but I will just repeat that artificial intelligence and generative AI is like the discovery of fire. We have to manage it and control it and channelize it in a very fruitful way. Otherwise, it will burn us down. But if we channelize it well, we regulate it well, it can be of great benefit to society and economy. So the fifth industrial revolution is about ensuring, and I will repeat the point, it's about people and planet, not just profits. We have to make sure that technology serves the people, it serves society, it serves the planet. And if we are able to do that, I think all countries, the growth economies and the legacy economies, will benefit from it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, and thank you for the book. We hope definitely we will get our hands on it very soon and read that masterpiece. I would like to invite finally Abhilash. Abhilash, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can, Anthony.
Give us your final shots on the South-South cooperation and, of course, moving forward, what the southern countries should be looking at in the next couple of years if we are to have a success of this cooperation.
See, Anthony, if we look at the top 5 largest GDPs in the world, 2 of them are from the global south. If we look at the fastest growing economies in the world, 17 out of 20 of them are from the global south. So there is a huge potential for sure. There is something that we really can work, and we have realized that. The global south countries have realized that there is certainly a great future if we can collaborate with each other and also, of course, with the global north. I'm not saying we have to be isolated within this whole world and only work with ourselves, but also with the global north. And the reason why we have realized this is because we are the largest demographic group in this world. We have the largest resources in this world. So if you look at these 2 aspects itself, it is quite large for us to be able to, work together and this for the potential that it has got. And like Pranjal had very rightly said, technology is the equalizer. And having that kind of technology that we have today, if it is not today, then when? So like Rafiki in The Lion King says, it is time. So it is really the time for us to move forward as the global south, to work towards what we all believe in together. And the same thing comes from the title of the G20, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means the world is one family. So that's where I think we are heading, and I think that's where we should be heading.
Mr. Abhilash, for that very, very wonderful response. Finally, I want to invite Mr. Thieno Andrew on behalf of Smart 24 TV and on behalf of our viewers to just give us a roundup and a vote of thanks, especially to you gentlemen who have joined us on this very wonderful edition of the South-South Cooperation Day. Mr. Thieno.
Thank you very much, Anthony. First, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Mr. Sharma for that wonderful book. I'm really looking forward to getting a copy myself. As one who belongs to the world of academia, I said this a few days ago, but congratulations. That was definitely a great piece of work. We are waiting to discuss that book more in various other fora with you. Please ensure that it will not reach within the precision of your borders. That is information that we would like to have here in Africa also. Secondly, gentlemen, it's unfortunate Dr. Mutiso Mangiza had to leave us, but thank you very much for having accepted our invitation. Mr. Abilash, very good friend and colleague, very kind of you to have accepted the invitation. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Pranjal Sharma, thank you very much also. It was only a few days ago, very short notice actually, that you were able to join us, but very kind of you for having done so. On a final note, I'm really happy to announce that if my colleagues on screen will cooperate with what we're proposing, to our viewers, I'd like to let you know that this is not the last discussion we're having with this panel. I'm glad to inform you that in the next few weeks, months or so, depending on the availability of the gentleman you heard speaking, we shall be having another discussion with the very same panel, Dr. Shingai Mutiso Mangiza, Mr. Puljal, Mr. Sharma. We shall be having another discussion right here on Smart 24 TV, particularly revolving around the BRICS summit that recently happened in South Africa, where Dr. Mangiza is, and the G20 that has just concluded in South Africa. The next discussion, therefore, with this very panel on Smart 24 TV, the BRICS and the G20. See you then, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thieno. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Mr. Puljal, Mr. Sharma, once again, staying with us all this time. I would just want to wish you a very good time wherever you are, and see you again.